I'm Ellen Cunningham, and today I have the privilege of interviewing my mom, Jane Henshaw Shiley Cunningham, about her knowledge of Prospect Hall.
I'm Jane Henshaw Shiley Cunningham, and I was born on Prospect Hall on May the 19th, 1934. I'm a daughter of Mary Julia Henshaw Shiley, who is the sixth child of Charles Willoughby Henshaw and Florabelle Glaze Henshaw. My mother lived on the farm with her mother as my grandfather had passed away in 1920 and left my grandmother and my mother on the farm. And so my mother took care of my mother my mother took care of her mother until 1928 when my grandmother passed away. We're going back a couple years. Back in 1913, there was a family who moved down from Middletown, Virginia to a farm adjoining Prospect Hall, and their names were Shileys. And then in about 4 years, they moved down to another farm, 2 farms from Prospect Hall along the Opequon Creek. And so that is how my father and mother met. And they were married in 1929. And Daddy farmed the farm, Prospect Hall, from 1929 to 1951. I grew up on the farm as an only child. We had horses. We had about 16, 18 cows that we milked. We had pigs. We had chickens. We had turkeys. Turkeys were always the ones that when it rained, they would stick their heads up and you couldn't, what we call drive them to the turkey coops, because they were that's where I think that the term comes. Dumb as a turkey?
Mom, your mother was the 6th child of Florabelle and C.W. Henshaw. Was she the youngest, or how many children were there?
She was the youngest.
She was the youngest.
Youngest of 6 children.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And those 6 children are who I know as all of your first cousins, and all the people that I would have seen at all these Henshaw family reunions over the years.
Were my uncles and aunts.
Oh, you're right. They were your uncles and aunts. I'm mistaken.
The other 5 children were my uncles and aunts, and they were Aunt Susan, Aunt Flossie, Aunt Edith, Uncle Calvin, and Uncle Smith. Okay. They were the other siblings of my mother.
Okay. All right, so your mother nursed her mother, and she went by, Florabelle did not go by grandmother. What name did
everybody called Florabelle Grammy. She was known Grammy to the family, she was known Grammy to all her friends, and she was known Grammy to all the neighbors. She was known as Grammy Henshaw.
Grammy Henshaw.
And greatly loved.
What do you know about her? Did you ever meet her?
I never met her, but I've had people who knew her and loved her over the years who had been friends of my mother's and Grammy's at that time. She just loved people. She enjoyed having people come to visit.
Always glad to see you.
And her door was always open.
Always glad to see you. Is that what you mean?
She was always glad to see you when you came to see her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then your grandfather, C.W. Henshaw, he was not originally going to farm, was he?
No, he was going to study, was in the beginning of studying medicine. And when his aunt, Beck, who was a sister to his mother.
Okay. And this is, and her name was, Aunt Beck's real name, or full name
was Rebecca Hunsicker.
Rebecca Hunsicker. Okay. So Prospect Hall was built by the Hunsickers?
Hunsickers, yes.
Okay.
In 1808 and furnished in 1812.
Okay, now is that the sampler that you have?
I have a sampler that was made by Aunt Beck that outlines basically the house and how the house was built. And this is how the house originally, and it is still to this day, it has 2 rooms and it has a big hall and a winding staircase that goes up to the 3rd floor. And then there are 2 rooms here. One,
Yeah, 2 rooms. It's 2 rooms. It's 2 rooms on each side.
2 rooms on each side of the door, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So this was made by Rebecca Hunsicker.
And her name is assigned at the top. And she started this, we don't know, we don't have a date. We've sort of maybe sometime, maybe she was working on it sometime when the house was being built, or she did it after the house was built. So we're saying maybe somewhere between 1808 and 1812, 1814 maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, and
Now-
her name is at the top.
And Rebecca never married, did she?
Aunt Beck never married, no.
Okay.
And she and her brother Michael were the 2 children that were left on Prospect Hall after Michael and Rebecca's siblings had left. Some of them had gotten married and left home. So the only people left on Prospect Hall were Michael, who never married. He was a cabinet maker. He made apparently wonderful furniture in his day. And then Aunt Beck. So when Michael died, he had willed the farm to Aunt Beck, and she was one person on a farm of 196 acres. So she asked her nephew, Charles Willoughby Henshaw, to come and take over the farm for her. He had been studying medicine, and so he came and took over the farm for Aunt Beck and stayed there, and he was there until 1920 when he died.
What are some of the things, when I think about the history that you've shared with me, I kind of think that there are some big themes that kind of go with this, and one of them is education. We have so many educators and so many educated people in our family. How can you pinpoint that to CW? Is there any story about
yes,
education in the family?
CW was very, very, very. He wanted his children to be educated, and he brought in a governess from Winchester, and her name was Miss Nellie Diffenderfer. And she taught the children, that would have been Uncle Smith and Aunt Edith and Aunt Susan. She taught them at home. Then in the wintertime, CW and Flora Bell would take these 4 children and go to Winchester and live in Winchester for 9 months. And the children Aunt Edith went to the Episcopal Women's Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Aunt Susan went to Fort Loudon.
Okay.
Uncle Smith and Uncle Calvin went to the Shenandoah Valley Military Academy, which is really. And then later, Uncle Calvin went to Washington, graduated from Washington and Lee, and Uncle Smith finished at the Shenandoah Valley Military here in Winchester. Then when Aunt Flossie and my mother, when they got up to be off to school, he sent them to Powhatan College in Ranson, West Virginia, which is a part of Charlestown. And that building is still standing.
So education was very important.
Very important to him.
He educated his sons and he educated his daughters.
Yes, he did.
Now there's something else that I hear that he did, because apparently my grandmother had something on her arm over here. That was a
Granddaddy.
silver dollars size shape.
Granddaddy, with the medicine that he knew, he vaccinated each of his children. And the vaccinations at that time were about the size of a silver dollar on their arms.
That scar?
And it was their vaccination for smallpox.
For smallpox.
Yes. And
So your mother was born in
1897.
1897. So in the early 1900s, somewhere in there, he's vaccinated his family against smallpox. Very cool. So your mother is the youngest, and she ended up being on the farm as the youngest, unmarried, and she took care of Grammy until Granny's death in 1928.
29.
1929.
28, right, I'm sorry, 1928. Mother and Daddy were married in 1929, correct, I'm sorry.
And so then she meets my grandfather, James Shiley,
Which who lived 2 farms down from them.
2 farms down the road. Now, I also remember, I think Aunt Flossie met
Aunt
a young man.
Aunt Flossie met Uncle Howard, and Uncle Howard was about a mile and a half on down the road from Prospect Hall. And the Henshaw girls were known as beautiful girls. I mean, when I had some friends who were much older and knew the Henshaw girls, as they were known, they were all considered beautiful, beautiful, beautiful girls. And they were. Their pictures, if the pictures of their young age, all the girls were beautiful girls.
Were they light-haired or dark-haired?
Mother always said she was blonde. I mean,
Okay.
light-haired.
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 Okay. Just kind of curious.
I don't remember because as they older, see, I only got to know the aunts as they were older.
Mhm.
And of course, their hair was that time had gotten dark and was, graying as we all grayed sort of early.
Okay. Now, I've always heard about the Henshaw hospitality, and one of the things, and we joke about the table we're sitting at right now, is it's magnet for people.
It is.
To bring people. So can you tell me about the table we're sitting at?
This table was in the dining room at Prospect Hall. It was in the dining room for many years before I came along. And it hosted people who came to work on the farm to help get the wheat in, and the extra workers who came to help were always at the table as well as the family.
So this really is that this table has the history of the Henshaw family around it. And you know or believe that this is a table that is original to the house.
Yeah.
With the furnishing of the house in the 1810s, 1812s, and comes from Baltimore.
Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
Everybody just, when we would have a meal, everybody would sit down and we would eat, and everybody stayed at the table talking. Everybody just sat around and talked around the table until it was time to go home.
Or to eat another meal, right?
Or eat another.
When I visit cousins of yours, I've noticed that in their homes, sometimes there is a gold chair or a black chair. And they look like a chair, or the 2 chairs that you have, one gold and one black. Where did the gold and black chairs
The
come from?
gold and black chairs came, and there were 6 of each. They came from Baltimore, and they were furnished in the house. The Hunsikers furnished the house in 1812. 6 Henshaw children, each one got a black chair, and each one got a gold chair,
Okay.
because those were the original furniture that was put in the house by the Hunsikers in 1812. And that came from Baltimore.
Was the Chester drawers that Dad used, the walnut Chester drawers, would that have been from the Hunsikers, or do you know if that's from the Hunsikers or the Henshaws?
I'm not sure whether that, I have a feeling that's more from the Henshaws.
Okay.
I
But
don't-
that was at Prospect Hall.
Right, that was at Prospect Hall.
Okay.
We have the stove that's in the living
The
room,
parlor stove?
the parlor stove that's in my living room, was the parlor stove at Prospect Hall. Because the parlor was so cold in the wintertime, and we didn't have any refrigeration, and it was cold, and so whenever Mother would bake up pies or whatever she baked, always was put on the hearth, just stacked on the hearth of the stove.
So
And,
it was decorative but not used for heating.
It was
when
not.
you
It was
were living
not
on the
used.
farm.
It was not used on the farm, and because we blocked off all the chimneys because they were not in good, safe condition to have a fire in
I
the
see.
fireplaces as for heat.
Okay.
We did not have electricity until 1947.
And-
After World War II, government came through, and you had to sign. They had to get so many farmers to sign up in order to run the line through for the farmers. Some of the farmers were very reluctant. They had to be talked into getting electricity in. And so finally, they all consented and the line was built, and our electricity was turned on Christmas Eve of December 1947. We had a telephone on the wall, and it was a wall phone, and you cranked it. And you cranked it so many turns if a person on the line's number was something that ended in 32. The 3 was a long ring, so you did 3 long rings, and the 2 was 2 short rings. And then that would ring into their house or their home, and they picked it up, and of course that ring went on a lot of other people's line. That's how news traveled, was because everybody was listening to
Little gossip.
Little gossip was listening to so and so.
So that would be the party line.
And that was called the party line. And you know, because you lived out in the country, you know, you were 2-3 fields wide from the next neighbor. That was one way of getting to know what your neighbors were doing.
When did your father sell the farm?
Sold the farm in 1951 to Mr. and Mrs. Tom Lurie from New York.
Okay.
And they remodeled it extensively. They took off the 2 porches that we had that were built on the house. They took those off and put columns up, as it is known as today, with the columns.
It's a little more Georgian looking now, I think, with the columns.
The barn was built in 1886.
It's an 1880s farm?
1886, I think. The beams are hand-hewn logs, and the logs are held together with wooden pegs. It is really one of the kind barn at that time.
It's neat that it's still standing.
And it's
from
still
the 1880s.
still standing.
It's really neat. That's 130 years ago, so
Still
that's
standing,
really neat.
yes.
Really neat.
The Luries sold the farm to a Mr. and Mrs. Turner from Middleburg, and they had horses. The Turners sold it to Mr. Haynes of Haynes Underwear, and he had it for a number of years. We had a family reunion there in 1997 or 2001 when Mr. Haynes gave us permission to come back and have a family reunion. Then he sold it to the Washington Star. The Washington Star is a newspaper from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And it is owned by Mr. Mooney. I don't know his first name. He's turned part of his business that Prospect Hall falls under to his son. And his son now is the chief overseer of Prospect Hall.
So what is Prospect Hall now?
Prospect Hall is a hunt club, a very exclusive hunt club. They do bird hunting. We've talked to Jimmy, the manager, and they bring in 6 varieties of birds, and they use 6 varieties of birds for their bird hunting.
Okay. So most of the house that we kind of see in the sampler, even though there's modifications, that's still standing. There's pieces that are gone, an old kitchen, and the barn is still standing.
Barn is still standing. Then in the early 1900s, that Granddaddy built on 4 rooms addition, and then 4-room addition to the house, and that was weatherboard, and that then was used as a kitchen and dining room, and 2 bedrooms upstairs with a small bedroom across the hall. The steps were winding, very narrow winding steps from the kitchen up to that 2nd floor, and there was a small hall, and 2 bedrooms were upstairs in addition to this small bedroom that was at the top of the steps. And there was not any way that there was not any opening from the brick end of the house into the new portion that had built on. So we used those 4 rooms in the wintertime. That's where we lived in the wintertime because it was less, it was more, for the three of us, that was all we needed for heat.
On the buffet behind you, and in the buffet, am I correct that the buffet behind you also comes from Prospect Hall?
No,
I was
buffet does
incorrect.
not come from Prospect
I was
Hall.
incorrect. On top of the buffet, though, there is a water pitcher that I know that we always wanted to play with, but we didn't. Can you tell us about where the water?
The water pitcher was given to Granddaddy and Grammy for their 25th wedding anniversary, and it has been used by many of the wedding receptions of the cousins, of the grandchildren
Okay.
of C.W. and Flora Bell. It has been used on many occasions.
And again, this is a water pitcher.
This is a water pitcher.
Okay.
We were fortunate enough, and it's insulated. That's the amazing thing that I think is so interesting, is that this is an insulated. There's insulation, so if you put ice in and cooled your water, that the condensation that would develop from being the cold, it has a little hole in the bottom, and that condensation then dripped down into this little pan, that little tray that's underneath. This is the tray that'll catch the condensation.
That's neat.
And I was fortunate enough here several years ago to find an article in a magazine that tells about the water pitcher.
Oh, that's neat.
And it shows a picture of the water
Pitcher.
of the water pitcher like it, and describes about it. So I've always kept that piece of paper in the water pitcher just so that and it has it has a little tab there, and you screw that tight, and then the ice, and you turn it over, and the ice would not fall out. And it has a stop. It has a stop that stops it from swinging. I have Flora Bell and Charles Willoughby's wedding certificate when they were married, and they were married in, I can't read it, in 18.
Okay, they were married in 1884, and they were married in January of 1884. Interestingly enough, in the state of Indiana.
They went out to a cousin of Flora Bell's that had married a Robinson, a Dorchester Robinson, and they went out to Indiana. Never understood why Charles Willoughby was from Bunker Hill, West Virginia. Flora Bell was from Gainesboro, Virginia. And I never understood why they drove all the way to Indiana to get married. I don't know that we ever, any of us ever know why they went to Indiana. But in the picture of Flora Bell on her wedding, on her picture, she has an earring, and this is the earring.
It's one of the earrings.
And it's one of the earrings. Aunt Flossie got the other earring, and Aunt Edith got a pin, a bar pin. This earring has been used as a necklace. It has been used for weddings. I used it for my wedding, and I think Beth used it for her wedding. And so I use that as an earring that Grammy wore when she was married in her wedding picture.
From 1884, that's neat.
1884.
Okay, now this takes us a little bit further into the future here, or in their future. So these are the same people.
It's the same people as they grew older.
As they grew older.
This is the same Charles Willoughby and Flora Bell. And she was known as Belle. He called her Belle. And he was called Will. which was interesting that she was Belle Henshaw and he was Will Henshaw.
Bill and Will. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. You've got a spoon laying there. Can you tell me about the spoon that's laying there?
We have a spoon that goes back to the Hunsikers, which is Charles Willoughby's aunt.
Mm-hmm.
One of his aunts married a Captain Charlie Stewart, who was in the Revolutionary.
He was in the Civil War.
Civil War.
Wasn't he? And I believe he fought for the Confederacy.
Okay. And he became a jeweler in Charlestown. He had a jewelry store in Charlestown. And he made jewelry. And he made silverware. And this spoon he made, the records show that he took $2 and hammered out and got spoons. He made 6 spoons. There were 6 spoons, and each one of Belle and Will's children, each one got a spoon from Charlie Stewart. Teaspoons that were also made, and I think some of the grandchildren, some of the children got was some teaspoons, and the teaspoon he made out of a silver dollar.
Out of $1 silver dollar.
So it took $2 silver to make a tablespoon and $1 silver to make a teaspoon.
Okay. So these are called, this is coin silver.
And this is coin silver.
Good.
Very, very light. And it has his name on the back. It has Stewart engraved on the back of the spoons. Wow, shaking so. Yeah. So this little cup, this was buried.
That was buried.
This was buried. One of the little children took this out and buried this cup until after the war was over.
Which war, Mom?
Okay, so then this would be through the Civil War. The soldiers came through Prospect Hall. They had slaves. The Hunsikers had slaves, and the slaves took a horse and put the horse down into the cellar and kept the horse hidden when the army came through. The army stripped the farm of all the chickens, all the animals, stripped the farm completely, and the only thing that they had left was this horse that the slaves had put down in the cellar to keep. And the troops did not know that this horse was in the basement, in the cellar.
Do you know which army had come through?
I don't know.
I would imagine
I think we would find it in the records. I don't know. I'd go check that out.
Right.
Check that out.
Well, one of the reasons for the privilege I have of interviewing you is that we are coming up on the 40th anniversary of the Henshaw reunion, and this is for the children and grandchildren of C.W. and Flora Belle Henshaw.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Henshaw reunion, the history of it, or
The Henshaw reunion is an
offshoot?
An offshoot of the Rinker reunion. The Rinker reunion was started in 1930, and the Rinker reunion is descendants of Caspar Rinker II, who was a great grandfather of Harriet Susan Rinker, who married George Glaze, who had Annie Susan, Luther, Will, Hunter, John,
Betty.
Harriet, Effie, Flora Belle, of whom Flora Belle is married Charles Willoughby Henshaw and is our grandmother. So the Rinker reunion
Was a reunion of your grandmother's
family,
Okay.
all the Rinkers, and all their offspring. And the Rinker reunion was held the first Thursday of every August.
Mhm.
the first Thursday. Then we had it at different places in Frederick County. We had it at Jordan Springs, we had it at Rouse Springs, we had it at,
The cool storage.
then World War II came along. And for like 3 years, we didn't have a reunion because of the war. So after the war, the next year would have been 1944, 45.
46.
We didn't have a place to go to meet on to have the reunion. So we met at the Winchester Cold Storage on North Loudon Street. That was interesting because the cold storage had cleared out, they had cleared out everything in August because they were getting ready to bring in the apples in September to put in on storage. So the cold storage was open. And all the younger kids had wonderful times running in and out of those rooms.
Would that be you?
Well, that probably would have been me.
Yes,
I was
as one of
probably-
the younger kids running around those
I
rooms.
did, because I do remember the rooms going into those big rooms that later on would be turned into very cold. So then,
So
the
when
next
did
year.
So when did the Henshaw reunion start?
So then the next year, we met at a place called the War Memorial Park in Winchester, Virginia. And it was a new park being started. It had ruts, the road into the park was nothing but ruts. And they had built one shelter. And that time the shelter was Lions Club shelter. So we met at the Lions Club shelter for a number of years, and then we changed shelters. So after 40 years of meeting in the Winchester Park, there were times that we met alternately in the park in Martinsburg after the war also. So there were alternate years that we'd meet in Martinsburg one year and in Winchester the next. So the last reunion we had was at the Clearbrook Park. We went to Clearbrook Park and had a reunion. Sorry. The last reunion was in the park
Was it
in
the
Winchester.
Rotary Shelter?
The Rotary Shelter in Winchester. So
And-
we decided that there was such few attendance in the regular reunion, and most of the attendance was by the Henshaws, the Henshaw family. So we decided that we would maybe try to start a Henshaw reunion. And so in 1976, we started the first Henshaw reunion.
Your great-grandmother is Julia Anna Margaret Hunsicker, Hunsicker Henshaw. Right, she's Hunsicker Henshaw.
Right, she
Okay.
married, yes. So, because I had the pleasure of having cousins to come.
And how many first cousins did you have?
At
Or do
20
you have?
Of 21st, I did have 21st cousins. There's only six of us living.
Where are you in the birth order of those 20?
I'm next to the youngest.
Yes, to the youngest.
And
who's
Dorothy's the youngest.
Dorothy Bolts.
Dorothy Bolts is the
Coyle
youngest.
is the youngest. Okay, all right. So when all the cousins did all the cousins come at once, or did they come as
No,
families?
they came as separate. They would come like for 2 weeks, or they would come for a week and stay.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, not having electricity, it was dark because we had kerosene lights. And so when the kids would come from the city, from Martinsburg or Strasburg, where they had street lights, and you come to the farm, when the sun went down, it was black. I mean, it was dark.
It's dark.
It's dark, except for the little kerosene lamp that you have in the house. And we carried kerosene lamps to bed, up the steps to go up to the light to carry it up. So we could go upstairs to see to go to bed. We had kerosene lamps. My homework was done on this table.
Okay.
And all my
With
homework
a
was
kerosene lamp?
with kerosene lamp. We had what they called a Aladdin lamp, which was a wick, a sort of a mesh wick
Is it like a mantle, a mesh mantle?
It was like mantle.
Mantle,
That's
okay.
correct. It was a mantle that sat in your underneath your chimney. Put your chimney down, and you would light this mantle, but you had to be very careful because if you turned it up too high, it would burn a side out of the mantle.
Is it,
It gave a brighter light than just a regular kerosene lamp that had a wick across.
is the Aladdin lamp kind of like a Coleman lantern that people use for camping with a mantle?
Probably is now. Probably that would be a modern Coleman lantern would be a modern
Okay.
across from what the mantle that we had those lead lamps were only used when you had company. They were very special because they gave more light and it made you feel like you were a little more stylish because all of us were, what do I want to say? We weren't as poor as Job's turkey. As the saying goes, why Job had a turkey that everybody remembers. But anyway, we all had plenty. We had milk, we had chickens, we had eggs, we had hogs, we had pork and ham and sausage, summer sausages, which Aunt Becky loved. And summer sausages were, when you butchered and made summer sausages, a long metal tub that he buried in the ground, and they built fire under it and filled it full of water. And that's where they would scald the hogs to get the hair off the hog. And then they would take the skin and then hang. They cut the hog, split and hang it. They had places they hung. All of that stuff was done not around the presence of women.
And were you there when they did that?
They sent me to school. I never was around a butchering. The only butchering that I ever was around was I would go to Aunt May and Uncle Smith's on Thanksgiving Day. We always butchered the Monday before Thanksgiving. Uncle Smith and Aunt May always butchered on Thanksgiving Day. I would go over, Mother and Daddy would go. Daddy would help Uncle Smith out here with this. Then they would bring in, when they would cut the fat off, what we would call the lard, they would bring that in, and that was my job of cutting up the lard, to put it in the big kettle to make, the fat. They would bring the fat in, and you cut the fat up, and you put it over, like you make apple butter. You'd have these big brass kettles with a fire under it, and you put that fat in, and it would render out the lard.
Right, you have to render the lard out.
What you'd call render the lard. Sometimes a woman was around stuffing the sausage. There was a Mrs. Owens that went from farm to farming, and she would be the lady. We would get her on a Sunday night to have her there early in the morning, and she would be what we would do the casings. She would clean the casings. And some people weren't so particular about cleaning the casings, but Mrs. Owens was, and she was known. People would go get her, and that's all she did. She would sit and clean the casings in a crock. And Uncle Smith would, and my daddy did, and I'm sure other people did. They would take the car, jack it up, start the car, and I guess you'd put it in whatever gear.
Did they take a tire off?
And they would fasten the handle to the sausage stuffer.
A belt, kind of fasten a belt to the...
And you'd have the sausage meat, and you'd put the casings onto the sausage stuffer, and this would turn, and the sausage would come through the casings, and you watch the sausage come through the casing. They strip the casings on.
Right.
Strip the casing on first. And then you'd sit there and the sausage. That is as much butchering that I ever got to do, was cut the lard and do that. And we only did that at Aunt May's. But I do know that by the time I get home from school sometimes, they would be stuffing sausage.
Okay.
And they would kill, my daddy would kill like 8 hogs. So when you kill 8 hogs, you got a lot to do.
There is a
You've
lot
got
to do.
a lot to do.
So
The lard then would be put in what they called lard cans, and they would just get hard, and you put your can on it, and then you had these lard cans, and then that's what you dipped your lard out to cook with, and you
Okay. So was there
kept it in-
anything else made? Because I tend to think of something called scrapple.
Well,
Or panhas?
we call panhas, and we would take, they would take the face of the hog, and they didn't take the feet because the feet they would use to make sauce,
Okay.
to gel out.
And that's that's more
That's more
gelatinous.
gel, yes.
Okay.
But the pawn horse they would take would be, we didn't use any meat in it other than just cornmeal and the broth that they cooked the joels in, they would be kind of fat. They would be joels they cooked. And they would use cornmeal, and then that would set up, and then you would pour that into dishes or pans. And then later you would just turn that upside down and slice it off and fry it. And there's nothing any better than a homemade scrapple.
Okay.
Or panhas as we call it. I need to go back to where the cousins would come and they would ice skate when the creek and the pond would freeze over. Aunt Flossie's children would come. They would get ice skates for Christmas, and they would come and they would skate on the creek and they would skate on the pond. And then the kids would come in the summertime and stay like a week or two. Aunt Flossie's Jean and Helen came one year to pick cherries, and they stayed the farm about 4 farms below us. That was a cherry farm, and they came and stayed and picked cherries. But that was they were earning their first money that they were. But the kids came and they had a good time. They helped sometimes. They helped in the garden, shell beans and snap beans, and helped Aunt Mary and helped Uncle James. But Uncle James was very particular about his straw rick in the barnyard. When you make a straw rick, when you're thrashing and you make a straw rick, you have to put a cap on it. There's a certain way that you place the straw when you're almost finishing doing the thrashing. There's a certain way that you put, and I think they do it probably with the pipe that takes, blows the straw out into the yard. And so there's a certain way, the man who's out there making this, keeping this all together, there's a certain way that you put a cap on. And the reason you put a cap of straw a certain way on a straw rick is to keep it from going bad from the weather. It rains.
Okay.
And so it's some way it's layered, some way it's done. It keeps the rain from going all the way down, and so when it would get wet inside, the straw isn't any good.
Right.
So you always wanted good straw to put in the barn for the bedding of the cows and the horses and the sheep if you need straw for wherever you need straw. But the kids would come and they always wanted to jump out the barn onto the straw rick. And Uncle James, my daddy was very particular about you just did not go near that straw rick because he didn't want that topping broken because it ruins your straw, and you can't have straw ruined.
Mom, as you think back about being the last Henshaw to live on Prospect Hall, as well as the 40 years of the Henshaw reunion,
Oh my goodness.
what are some takeaways? What would you?
Oh my goodness. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, because it's a lifestyle that
maybe at the time you're growing up, you don't think that you're being privileged, but it is a privilege to have lived, and the history that's all behind, where I live. I mean, there's so much history entwined in that piece of property, as well as the family the 6 children who grew up there, of the Henshaws. The heritage that those children have gotten,
And the heritage that we all have.
and the heritage has been handed down through a couple generations now, because it's an Henshaw reunion was just a big part of the family, and I guess because goodness, where did that come from? My goodness, that wasn't supposed to come up. Oh my goodness, we can't have that. We can't have that, you know. But anyway, I'm sorry, thank you. Maybe that tells it.
Yeah, maybe that does.
Maybe that's the end. That's not a very not a nice end, I know, but it's just it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful every time. Just to think back of how many changes have happened in the heritage that went into Prospect Hall and how it was built, and the families that have lived there started out with the Edwardses, and the Edwards to the Hunsikers, and the Hunsikers to the Henshaws, and the Henshaws to my family. It's a great privilege to live there. The reunion, it has been a joy to have all the cousins to get together. And, you know, being an only child, it makes you have brothers and sisters. It just gives brothers and sisters. And they all are special, have always been very, very special. All the cousins, because all the cousins at some point have been to Prospect Hall. They would bring the boys after the war was over, they would bring their girlfriends or their wives to meet my parents. They were always, Aunt Mary and Uncle James always had to meet their parents. And that was such a joy to my mother, and Daddy also, but it was always to my mother because they were her nieces and nephews who always came back home. Back home. It's like the dining room table. Prospect Hall drew people to come back home. Thank you.
That sounds good.